Hi there. In this video, we're going to be talking about geometric notation. Now, there's a couple of words I want to talk about. The first word is congruent. All right, we're going to use this word quite a bit throughout the course. We're going to use the symbol with an equal sign and a tilde up top. All right, indicates that two things are congruent. Now, when I say congruent, that means that two things have the same measure. Okay, so if I come in here and let's talk about congruent segments and congruent angles. Okay, so let's look at segments first. Let's say I have segment RT. All right, and let's say I have segment JM. Okay, so let's say that RT has a length of 4 inches, all right? And the same thing applies to JM. This segment has 4 inches. What we can say is that segment RT is congruent to segment JM, all right? Those two segments have the same measure. Now, one thing we could do is we could come in here and we could say that RT is congruent to JM strictly by using this tick mark to show that. All right, now if I've got one tick mark, any other segment that has one tick mark, those are going to be congruent. Now the other thing I could say about this is, let's say I had, a segment like this, like let's say that this is 5 inches, and we'll call this BD. Okay, and let's say that I have another segment, all right, that we'll call KS, okay? And so let's say that this is 5 inches as well. Now, if I wanted to distinguish between, these congruent segments and these congruent segments, then I would come in here and I would use 2 tick marks to show that those are congruent. So if they have the same number of tick marks, then those segments are congruent. If they don't, then they're not congruent. So if this has 1 and this has 2, these are not congruent. All right, and we can come in here and we could say the same thing. We could say that segment BD is congruent to segment KS. All right, and you can switch that around. You don't have to order it this way, but that's that's one way you could do it. Let's talk about angles. Let's draw a couple of angles here. I'm going to draw an angle that looks like this, with a vertex of M, L, and then N, okay? And then let's come over here and we're going to draw a similar angle going like this, all right? And we'll call this PRQ, okay? And so what I want to do here is I want to say, all right, and we'll talk more about measuring angles, but what I've got here is that this is an angle that measures 40 degrees, okay? And then over here, I'm going to call this an angle that's also measured 40 degrees. So they have the same measure, okay? And when we measure angles, we measure them by, how much do these two things open up? And so from here, what we can say is that angle LMN is congruent to angle QRP. Okay, now another way that we could put that and say that is simply just by having the arc mark inside of that angle, okay? And so the arc mark indicates that these two angles are congruent. Now what we could also do, let me do another one. I'm going to do, say, 2 obtuse angles, okay? And let's name these angle STU and angle XYZ, okay? And let's say that these are each 130 degrees, all right? These angles have measured up to 130 degrees. And if I wanted to distinguish, these angles here from these angles here, I would use 2 arc marks to indicate that these are congruent, okay? And so that's how we distinguish that. So, I can come in here and say angle STU is congruent to angle ZYX, okay? And you can name these a bunch of different ways, but that's just how I'm going to show that. Okay, so that's the first thing. Let's talk about parallel lines. And we've probably talked about parallel lines before, but these are two lines that run side by side and do not touch. Okay, and so what I want to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, I've got this line and this line, all right? And I'm going to call this line L and line M. I'm also going to call this line AB, and I'm going to call this line CD, okay? And I'm just making these up, but what I know is that these two lines are parallel, okay? And so one way that we can show that is by using arrows on the inside that show that these are parallel. All right, now I can write this a couple different ways. All right, I could say that line L is parallel to line M. Or I could say that line AB, all right, is parallel to line CD. All right, it doesn't really matter, how you write that, but that's what you want to say. All right, now let's say that we had, in addition to these two lines, we had two more lines. All right, let's say we've got these lines here. All right, and for time purposes, I'm going to call this line K and N. Okay, and if these lines are parallel and they're on the same picture as this, then I'm going to use two arrows to show that those lines are parallel. And I would say that line K is then parallel to line N. Okay, and that's how I would name and talk about parallel lines. Let's talk about perpendicular lines. Now, perpendicular lines are lines that intersect and make a 90-degree angle. So intersect and create a right or 90-degree angle, okay? And so what I'm looking for is, like, let's say we've got two lines here that intersect. All right, I'm going to call this line L and line R, okay? And so I would know if these make a right angle if I have a symbol here that has a square in the corner, okay? And that's going to indicate that these lines are parallel. And so what I do to name that is I would say that line R is perpendicular with an upside down capital T to line L, okay? And if we wanted to come in here and put like, M, T, and R, S as points, okay, on those lines, what we could say is that RS, that line, is perpendicular to line MT. All right, so it's really, what I'm doing in this video is I'm really talking about how we name things, how we look at pictures, and how we can take something from a picture and write those things in geometric notation. All right, so this is, all these things that I'm doing here are really examples of geometric notation, of just taking information from a picture and writing those things out in words, okay? So we got congruent figures, segments, and angles. We've got parallel lines. We've got perpendicular lines. And that's all I've got for this video. So hopefully all this stuff makes sense to you. It's a good idea to have this stuff written down so that you can reference it later and use it, and should build on itself for future sections that we go over. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye!